Hey, nice to see you again. Today on this episode, we'll dive into stories of crocodiles attacking humans. From a man who dove into unknown waters to a man who challenged himself to catch a crocodile after watching it online. But first, we dive into the story where a teacher tried getting a ball that rolled into a water bend only to be attacked. It was September 18, 2017, and the afternoon heat along the Zambezi River corridor in northern Zambia had settled into the kind of dry, diffuse warmth that defines the region before the rains return. The river was visible from the lower end of the clearing, close enough that the glint of water was readable between the grass stems when the wind moved through. The pitch was informal, no fencing, no permanent markings, the ground worn flat by years of weekend use. Its nearest edge sat roughly 25 yards from the riverbank, separated by a narrow community access trail that sloped through tall grass toward the water. Caden Walker was 34 years old, a physical education teacher from Georgia who had come to Zambia several years earlier and stayed long enough to become a familiar presence in the community. He joined weekend matches the way people join things that feel natural, without ceremony, without calculation. He was the kind of person you trusted to retrieve a ball.
I already don't like where this is going. A soccer field 25 yards from a river never reads as dangerous until it is.
The access trail was avoided near the water where crocodiles had been sighted before. That knowledge existed in the community, the way most local knowledge exists understood by those who had been there long enough, less legible to those who had not. A ball rolling down the slope toward the trail's lower end had happened in previous matches and been retrieved without incident, and that history was part of why no one hesitated when Caden volunteered. This is the part that gets me every time. Not the moment of the attack, but the moment before it. The completely ordinary decision made in a fraction of a second because nothing looks wrong. That's where it always starts. I keep thinking that it's happened before and been fine is one of the most dangerous sentences a person can quietly believe. Nile crocodiles do not chase. They wait submerged along the margins of the water, positioned precisely where animals and people routinely approach. Their ability to hold a position motionless for extended periods, combined with coloration that reads as shoreline debris, makes them functionally invisible in the conditions they select. A large individual can exceed 15 feet in length and weigh upward of 1,000 pounds. At the moment of a strike, there is no preceding warning movement full speed from a standing start. The bite force of a large Nile crocodile has been measured in excess of 5,000 pounds per square inch, and the jaw structure that produces it is designed not to release once closed. Caden reached the ball near the water's edge and bent to pick it up. The crocodile came from the shallows without warning, a surge that arrived faster than any reasonable expectation of what water does. The jaws closed on his lower leg. At that force, the bones simply exist inside the grip rather than resist it. The animal immediately reversed into the river, hundreds of pounds of coordinated muscle dragging him off his feet and into the shallows before anyone in the clearing had taken 2 steps toward the bank. Once in the water, the crocodile initiated a lateral roll, a full rotation along its body's length that removes any remaining orientation a prey animal has. In open water with no ground beneath him and nothing to push against, Caden had no mechanical means to counter the rotation or the drag. The river accepted him and the animal moved into the channel.
Knowing that, my stomach actually dropped. There was never a version of this where he had a chance once the jaws closed.
I've thought about what it would mean to be standing in that grass, bending down for a soccer ball with no idea what was there. No noise, no shape in the water, just the clearing behind you and the simple task in front of you. That's a kind of vulnerability that doesn't feel like vulnerability until it's already finished. Search efforts continued for several hours. Wildlife officers recovered his remains downstream. The community stopped using that stretch of ground and permanently fenced off the river access point. The trail was closed. The warning had existed in the community's knowledge of that riverbank long before Caden walked down it. He simply hadn't been there long enough for it to feel like his warning too. I keep thinking about how many of us are standing on the edge of somebody else's obvious danger right now, in some ordinary place without a clue. This story isn't really about a crocodile. It's about how belonging to a place takes longer than feeling like you belong to it. What happened at that riverbank was shaped by unfamiliarity, a person in a landscape whose risks he hadn't fully absorbed.
The next death came from something closer to the opposite, a place that felt familiar to everyone involved, a risk dismissed by what looked like direct evidence, and a sequence that went wrong, not in the open water, but at the precise moment someone tried to leave it.
It was June 11th, 2019, and the holiday weekend had brought the kind of loose, unhurried energy that settles over rural Queensland when the construction sites go quiet. The morning was warm, the water looked inviting, and the group that stopped at the old bridge had stopped there before. Mike Pierce was 24 years old, a construction laborer who spent his days off with the same coworkers he ate lunch with on job sites. The bridge was a rural crossing over a tidal creek connected to a nearby nearby estuary. No signs, no designated recreation area, no safety infrastructure. A handful of people had jumped from it before without consequence, and that history had made it feel like somewhere jumping was reasonable. I know this dynamic. It's the same one behind every "we always do this here" spot, right up until it isn't fine anymore. One of Mike's friends jumped first, surfaced, swam to the muddy bank, grabbed at the root structure in the bank face, hauled himself up, and walked back without incident. From the bridge, that was a complete sequence entry: open water, exit, survival. Mike watched it happen, made his assessment, and jumped. I want to be direct about this logic. Watching someone do something and survive is not irrational. Most of the time, it works exactly as expected. The problem is that in a tidal creek connected to a saltwater crocodile estuary, the relevant variable was never what the open water looked like. It was what was positioned at the margin, waiting for the moment when something tried to leave.
Honestly, I would have jumped right after his friends too. That's what unsettles me the most about this one, because you wouldn't expect such a thing to happen.
Saltwater crocodiles, the largest living reptile species on Earth, with adults capable of exceeding 17 feet and 1,000 pounds, do not typically attack in open water. Their preferred position is the transition zone, the shallow margin where animals and people exit the water. Prey at a bank exit is moving slowly, focused on climbing out, with limited evasion options. A saltwater crocodile resting beneath an overhanging bank can remain motionless for hours and initiate an attack that closes before the target has processed that anything has moved. Their bite force has been recorded at approximately 3,700 pounds per square inch, a grip no human limb can mechanically break from outside it. Mike reached the bank, grabbed the root structure the same way his friend had, and began pulling himself up. His hands were above him, gripping the roots, his lower body still in the shallows, when the crocodile came from beneath the overhang. The strike was a single motion, jaws closing across his lower torso, the animal's full weight already committed to the direction of the water. The grip pulled him back down the bank face before his arms could anchor him to the roots above. In the shallows at the base of the bank, with no footing and his body already being controlled by the animal's direction, Mike had no mechanical position from which to resist. The crocodile executed a full lateral roll in the creek shallows, a single rotation that completed in under a second, eliminating whatever orientation he had retained. The creek received him, and the animal moved into the deeper channel. The image of his hands still on the roots while the rest of him was already being pulled down is the part I can't shake. The crocodile may not have been at that section of bank when his friend climbed out. It may have arrived in the minutes between one person leaving the water and the next. Or it had been there the entire time, motionless and undetected. Either way, what his friend's safe exit proved was only that his friend had gotten out. Nothing about that moment extended forward to the next person who approached the same bank. Emergency responders searched the creek into the evening. Wildlife officers recovered Mike's remains later. There's something uniquely difficult about this one. The false confirmation doesn't just feel like evidence, it looks exactly like evidence. Someone went first, someone came back up the bank, fine, and the exit that looked identical was the one that wasn't. This one bothers me the most out of all 7, because I don't think I'd have caught the flaw in that logic in the moment either. This is the one I'd have gotten wrong myself, and that's the uncomfortable part. If I saw my friend jump, swim, climb out, laugh about it, I would have jumped next too, without a second of hesitation. That's not a character flaw, that's just how humans evaluate risk. We're built to trust a repeated pattern, especially one we just watched happen with our own eyes. What kills me is that the water didn't change between the 2 jumps, only the timing did. And there was no way for anyone standing on that bridge to know the difference between safe and safe so far. I don't think this story has a lesson you can actually use in the moment. That's what makes it scarier than the first one, honestly. Each death so far happened in natural, unmanaged environments.
The next one happened inside a managed facility behind reinforced walls with written protocols designed specifically to prevent it. And it happened to the person who understood those protocols better than almost anyone else on staff.
It was February 8, 2021, and the Northern Territory had entered its late wet season, the air dense with humidity, the facility grounds saturated and green, mornings arriving already warm. Jacob Doyle was 46 years old and had worked around crocodiles for nearly 20 years. He was not learning procedures for the first time. He was the person other staff deferred to. He had helped draft some of the protocols that governed daily operations. The enclosure housed a dominant male saltwater crocodile 16 feet long, an animal exceeding 1,000 pounds, known among staff for extended motionlessness followed by explosive speed at close-range disturbance. That behavioral profile was noted in the animal's records. It was part of why the enclosure's procedures were written the way they were. I find it almost unbearable that the person with the most expertise in the room is who this happened to, not someone new. A drainage channel along the outer pond wall had developed a blockage Jacob had flagged the previous afternoon. The drain was accessible through a main maintenance gate opening onto a narrow concrete corridor beside the pond wall. Standard procedure required confirmed lockout of the animal in the holding section before any gate was opened. Jacob understood from a brief exchange with the early shift handler that the enclosures had been walked and verified. The early shift handler had verified a different section. The communication between them had been imprecise enough, a quick word in passing, assumptions on both sides that neither registered the gap. Jacob opened the gate and entered the corridor, believing the animal was secured. The crocodile had been in the main pond area all morning. I've gone back and forth on where the failure actually sits here. The protocol existed. Both men knew it. Neither deliberately skipped it. But the protocol required a specific confirmation, and what happened instead was an assumption based on an imprecise exchange, which is a completely human thing to do, and the exact thing the protocol was designed to prevent. Those two facts sit next to each other without resolving.
A quick word in passing is a sentence I've lived 100 times myself, just never with these stakes attached to it.
The concrete in the corridor was algae-slicked narrow, uneven, treacherous, near drain access points where moisture collected. Jacob moved to the blocked drain and knelt to assess the obstruction. The pond wall was to his left. The crocodile was in it, oriented toward the wall margin, the way captive saltwater crocodiles consistently are. When Jacob slipped on the algae-covered surface and fell against the drainage gap at the base of the wall, he came to rest in a position that placed him within reach, through the gap between the pond edge and the corridor floor. The crocodile moved from its position without any escalation phase. At 16 feet and over 1,000 pounds, the surge from motionless to full engagement covers the interior wall length in a fraction of a second. The jaws closed on Jacob's arm through the drainage gap, a grip exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, a closed mechanical system from the moment it established. The animal reversed its weight toward the center of the pond and pulled him through the gap. In the open water of the enclosure, it rolled. The displacement of water from a crocodile that size rolling in a confined pond is audible from outside the wall. Staff activated emergency procedures immediately. The danger posed by the animal made any approach to the water's edge impossible. The window had already closed. I keep imagining coworkers hearing that sound through the wall and knowing instantly there was nothing they could do. The facility revised its protocols, mandatory written confirmation requiring both the performing handler and a second staff member to independently verify and log lockout status before any gate opens. A miscommunication unremarkable in almost any other workplace had become the load-bearing failure in a fatal sequence. That's not unusual in these reconstructions. It's actually one of the most common findings.
It makes me a little sick that the fix was this simple and simply hadn't existed yet.
3 deaths, 3 environments, an informal pitch, a tidal creek, a managed facility. The next story moves to a different hemisphere. A sport fisherman in a Central American estuary who stepped out of his boat to recover something he decided was worth the water. It was October 27, 2015, and the Pacific coastal estuary outside Quepos, Costa Rica was running with the full tidal push of mid-morning, the water dark with suspended sediment, mangrove banks, dense and tangled on both sides. The channel threading between root systems in a way that made depth and bottom composition impossible to read. Travis Smith had driven 2 hours from his rental to reach this stretch before the tide changed. Travis was 39 years old, a commercial electrician from South Florida who had fished Florida's coastal channels his entire adult life. He had come to Costa Rica specifically for tarpon and was working the channel alone, without a guide, in a rented flat-bottomed boat. Late in the morning, he hooked a large fish that ran hard toward the western bank and wrapped itself beneath the root structure of a partially submerged mangrove. The water around the roots was tannin dark, opaque, beyond a few inches. He could have cut the line. He stepped out of the boat instead. I want to yell at the page here, cut the line, it's just a fish, even though I know that's not how it feels in the moment. The American crocodile inhabits the Pacific and Caribbean coastal waterways of Costa Rica, with a behavioral profile worth understanding before entering these waterways on foot. Human encounters along these channels are less frequent than in Florida, and attacks are documented with greater regularity. Adults regularly exceed 13 feet in length. They use mangrove root structure as concealment and ambush position, precisely where fish and the animals that pursue fish will appear. The root base of a productive tidal mangrove is not incidental habitat, it is a preferred station. Their bite mechanics, like all crocodilians, favor closing force overwhelmingly over any capacity to release under resistance. I keep coming back to what that water looked like from above, what it told him about what was underneath, which was nothing. Tannin-stained estuary water looks identical, whether the bottom is clean sand or a 13-foot crocodile that has been holding position at that root root structure since before he arrived. This is the part that gets me. Decades of experience in similar-looking water taught him nothing useful about this specific water. Travis waded to his thighs and reached beneath the root mass. The crocodile struck from beside it, jaws closing on his forearm and hand, before his reach registered that the object he contacted was not root structure. The soft estuary sediment provided no purchase. Nothing existed to push against. The animal pulled him laterally into the deeper water of the channel, and the current, already running with the tide, assisted the direction the crocodile was already moving. In deeper water, it rolled, a lateral rotation that removed any control over orientation, airway, or direction. The boat drifted. The rod went slack within seconds. Search efforts covered a wide section of the estuary that afternoon. Local outfitters noted afterward that solo fishing in that section had always carried risks most visiting anglers, had no framework to evaluate. He had fished tannin dark water for decades. He had fished it in Florida and walked away every time. He had not adjusted for what this specific waterway in this specific country had a documented history of containing beneath that same surface. I feel for him more than I expected to. Being alone with no guide meant no one there to say don't. Florida water and Costa Rica water can look like the same photograph and mean two completely different things underneath. I think about the line he had. He could have cut it, lost a fish, and driven home with a story about the one that got away. Instead, the fish was the thing that felt like the stakes. When the actual stakes were standing right there in murky water, he had no way of reading. It's such a small human decision. A hooked fish activates something in a person that just get out doesn't override easily. From a natural waterway where the risk was invisible beneath the surface, the next story moves to a location where the danger should have been apparent from every angle. An abandoned riverside property with a neglected pool that no one had assessed since the previous wet season ended. It was April 30th, 2018, and the East African interior was warming toward midday, the air dry enough that the standing water visible from the access road already carried the organic smell of water that has been sitting long enough to build its own chemistry. The Riverside Lodge had been closed for roughly 8 months following severe seasonal flooding that had compromised the drainage system, collapsed sections of the perimeter fence, and made reopening contingent on a full structural assessment. Caleb Taylor had arrived that morning to begin it. Caleb was 42 years old, a maintenance contractor who had spent his career moving through flood-damaged and abandoned structures, reading what water had done to a building by looking at the evidence it left behind. What he was less equipped to consider was what might have moved into the property during the months it had been sitting open.
A pool is such a strange place for this to happen. My brain still wants to call it safe, even reading it right now.
At peak flood level, the collapsed perimeter fence had connected the pool to an adjacent floodplain that remained saturated for several months. During that time, fish, frogs, and small animals moved freely between the pool and the surrounding low ground. Birds worked the waterline. Monitor lizards followed the food chain to the pool's edges. A crocodile in a confined body of water with consistent prey activity does not run short of reason to stay. When the dry season contracted the surrounding ground, the pool retained its water. Sections of the fence remained breached at ground level enough for small animals to continue entering, not enough for the pool's largest occupant to leave. A thick mat of algae and debris had accumulated across the surface, making the water visually impenetrable from above. Caleb was staging cleaning materials near the shallow end when he noticed what appeared to be debris caught against one corner, a shape partially submerged against the pool wall. He moved to the edge, knelt, and reached in to assess it. I actually said don't out loud reading that last line, which tells me something about how well this is building tension. This is the detail I keep returning to. Not the crocodile, but the shape in the corner. Without it, would he have reached in? Almost certainly not. The shape gave his hand a specific destination, and the destination was where the animal was positioned. The crocodile seized his forearm the moment his hand reached that corner. A large Nile crocodile's bite force, among the highest of any living animal, closes on a human forearm as a complete mechanical event. The bones and tissue of that limb are inside the grip, and no external human force can break it. The animal pulled him over the pool edge in a single directional motion, and Caleb, kneeling with his weight already distributed toward the water, went over the lip with the pull. In the confined space of the pool, with algae-coated walls and no shallow footing anywhere, the crocodile rolled. Workers on the deck above had no means of entering the water safely, and nothing within reach that could reach a person at the pool's center. The animal controlled the space entirely. I keep picturing his coworkers on the deck, watching, completely unable to do anything that must be its own kind of horror. Wildlife authorities recommended mandatory wildlife inspections of abandoned riverside properties before restoration work begins, specifically those that sustained flooding significant enough to compromise perimeter structures. Before that morning, it had not been an obvious requirement for what looked like a routine building assessment. No one looked at that pool and saw what it was. They saw a task. The difference between those two readings was everything. That last line stays with me.
That last line stays with me. They saw a task is such a small human way to miss something enormous.
I don't think Caleb did anything careless by his own professional standards. He was doing exactly the kind of hands-on inspection his job required for 8 months of flood damage. It's just that nobody had updated the category the pool belonged to in his head. It still looked like infrastructure. It had become habitat. From a property no one had occupied in months to a destination someone flew across an ocean specifically to reach the next story involves a person who had done her research, seen the photographs, and made every decision herself. The information was available, the choice was entirely hers. It was August 14, 2022, and the tidal channels of northern Australia had the particular stillness of mid-morning in mangrove habitat water, moving in slow pulses with the tide, the air thick with salt and mud, the dense root systems creating visual complexity that makes it difficult to determine where water ends and land begins. Lauren White had traveled here specifically because of what this landscape looked like in photographs. Lauren was 31 years old, a marketing consultant from Oregon with genuine paddling experience behind her. Not minimal time on flat water, but actual hours across different conditions. She was not unfamiliar with reading terrain from a kayak. What she did not have was direct experience with crocodile habitat, and rather than joining a guided excursion first, she rented a kayak and chose her own series of narrow tidal channels to explore. I understand the instinct to skip the guided tour completely. I've made that same call in far lower stakes situations myself. The launch area was signed. Multiple warning signs described the danger of approaching crocodiles, advised staying well clear of any animal on the bank, and specifically noted that tidal current in narrow channels could close distances faster than paddlers typically anticipated. Lauren had passed them on the way in. At some point during the morning, she spotted a large saltwater crocodile resting on a muddy bank and maneuvered to photograph it. The tidal current was moving toward the bank not strongly, but persistently, and the gap between her kayak and the animal had closed to approximately 20 feet before she fully registered how close the current had carried her.
20 feet still sounds so far in my head, which is exactly the miscalculation the story is describing here.
I've tried to understand the moment where you realize the current has moved you closer than intended, and you don't immediately backpedal with everything you have. My best guess is that at 20 feet, a resting crocodile still looks like something you're observing rather than something you're already inside the margin of. That's probably the last incorrect read a person makes in that situation. Saltwater crocodiles monitor the space around their basking sites continuously. A kayak drifting to within 20 feet crosses a threshold the animal registers as intrusion. The crocodile lifted from the bank and slid into the water in a single fluid motion, its body disappearing beneath the surface almost immediately. The channel went still, no visible shape, no surface movement, no indication of the animal's position. That stillness lasted only seconds. The strike came from directly beneath the kayak, an upward drive that lifted one side of the hull and rolled it completely. A sit-on-top kayak struck from below by an animal of this mass offers no resistance to the rotation. It inverts with the ease of an empty container. Lauren entered the water without orientation, cold, dark creek water, and sudden submersion, removing any reliable sense of direction in the first seconds. The crocodile was already at the point of impact. The strike that followed was fast, jaws closing before she had established any directed movement. In the narrow channel with deep mud banks on both sides, no functional exit existed at the speed the situation required. The current carried both of them downstream, from where the kayak spun slowly at the surface. That moment of the channel went still is somehow scarier to me than the strike itself. Search teams located the kayak within hours. Wildlife officers recovered her remains downstream. The warning signs had told her the current was something to account for. She had read them. What the current actually felt like in that narrow channel, moving steadily toward a bank where something was resting, that is the part a sign cannot give you. And it was the part that determined how close she was before she understood what she needed to act on.
I don't think any sign could have conveyed that feeling. Some things you only really learn by almost losing them.
From someone who encountered the risk at a location she traveled to, the final story moves to someone who engineered the encounter deliberately, not to kayak, not to fish, not to restore a building, but to approach a wild Nile crocodile alone on a remote riverbank with a rope he had made himself for a video frame he had decided he could produce. It was January 22nd, 2016, and the section of the Zambezi River Derek Miller had traveled to reach was remote in the way the Zambezi becomes remote in summer landscape. Dense and green from seasonal rains, water running full and opaque, the bank soft underfoot, no facilities, no other people. Derek had brought a camera, a tripod, and a rope loop fashioned from hardware store cord. He had driven several hours to get here. Derek was 37 years old and ran a wildlife-themed online channel documenting reptile encounters. He had watched professional wildlife programming extensively, specifically sequences in which trained handlers briefly looped a rope or catch pole around a crocodile's neck to establish momentary control for a camera shot. He had copied those clips into a folder and studied the visible mechanics carefully. He had not accounted for what surrounded every frame of that footage. The additional handlers off camera, the safety coordinator behind the shot, the veterinary personnel on standby, the extraction plan established before any approach began. None of that appears in edited broadcast. He had studied the product and come to the Zambezi to reproduce it, not to relocate an animal, not to conduct research, but to get the thumbnail frame.
A rope from a hardware store, alone, no backup. I feel my chest tighten just reading that combination.
He had no formal crocodilian training, he had no second person. The rope was not designed for this application. It was built to approximate something deployed by people whose entire workflow was built around everything the screen never shows. From the bank, Derek located what appeared to be a small crocodile resting at the water's edge, partially concealed in the muddy shallows, only the head and upper back visible. Estimating a crocodile's total length from a visible head profile is not straightforward. The submerged body can represent 2/3 to 3/4 of the total length. The animal was a subadult Nile crocodile, measuring approximately 10 feet and several hundred pounds, with jaw pressure, strike speed, and defensive capability fully developed. Appeared to be small is doing so much damage in that sentence, and I don't think he had any way of knowing it. What I keep thinking about is the folder of clips on his hard drive. He had studied the visible portion of a process surrounded at every step by infrastructure he had no way of seeing and apparently no reason to look for. The footage showed a man, a crocodile, a rope, and a successful outcome. That was the entirety of the information he brought to this riverbank. Nile crocodiles frequently respond to human approach by entering the water and appearing to withdraw, a repositioning, not a retreat, that places the animal in its own medium at close range, while the person following moves toward the water's edge. Derek followed the animal along the bank, rope loop in one hand, camera running on the tripod behind him. I want to reach into the page here. Following it toward the water was the one move that could never end well. The crocodile turned from the shallows without extended preliminary movement, a full-speed drive from the moment it reversed, the body mass of a 10-foot animal moving across shallow water faster than a person on soft ground can generate rearward movement. The initial impact, the animal's head and forebody driving into Derek's lower legs, took him off his feet before the jaws made primary contact. He hit the soft bank at the river's edge, and the jaws closed on his lower body as he landed. A Nile crocodile's bite at that size closes with a force the human pelvis and upper leg cannot hold position against. Once established, the animal drove immediately toward the deeper channel, the Zambezi, running fast in summer, the current assisting the direction the crocodile was already pulling. On soft sediment, disoriented from the impact, with nothing fixed within reach, Derek had no mechanical means to interrupt the drag. The river is deep in summer. The current moves with purpose. Both of them were in the channel within seconds of first contact. The rope loop was found on the bank. The camera continued recording from the tripod for several minutes afterward, pointed at a stretch of river that showed nothing but current moving downstream.
That image of the camera still rolling on an empty river is the one detail from all 7 stories I don't think I'll ever forget.
Wildlife officials used the incident in communications, specifically addressing the gap between what professional wildlife handling looks like on screen and what it actually requires: the coordinated teams, the institutional oversight, and the supervised training that exist entirely outside the frame of what gets broadcast. He had studied the footage until he believed he understood it. What he had actually studied was the surface of a process whose depth he had no framework to measure. That was where the sequence started. The riverbank was where it ended. Footage from the camera was collected by authorities and was not released to the public. I keep coming back to how he copied the one part of the process that was never actually dangerous. The camera left running on the tripod after it happened is the image I can't shake. It kept recording the empty river the same way it would have kept recording a successful shot. It didn't know the difference, and for a few minutes, apparently neither did anyone else. What actually gets me isn't that he was wrong about crocodiles. It's that he was wrong about the video itself. He thought the footage was the whole story, when the footage was specifically the part of the story where nothing dangerous was allowed to happen, by design, off screen. He copied the one part that was safe because everything unsafe had already been handled by people he never saw.